At the time of writing, the fourth Walten Files video, Cyber Tech, has been out for a few days, and I've started writing the script that will eventually be covering it, as well as the fifth and sixth installments, which will be coming out soon after them. But since that'll take a while, let's cover something else related to the series. Unfortunately, I've been away from the Walten Files fandom for a little bit, so I've missed out on most of the ARG elements of FindJackWalten.com. It's why I've been unable to cover it. However, having checked the pages recently, I did find one that I hadn't seen before, and because its contents give us an insight into the events that happened before and while Bond's Burgers was open, I'd like to do a short video now to briefly talk about them. It's the Caretaker Archive Library at /Caretaker Library, and among some images contains a number of messages left by a BSI worker named Richie, who seems to have been employed from 74 to 75, for another colleague of his. Since they cover from the 23rd of May 1974 to the 20th of July 1974, they give us a few little details on how BSI was preparing for their restaurant's grand opening, and also how they dealt with the various issues that cropped up, and honestly, I love to put things onto my timeline of events. So, let us briefly discuss these 6 answer phone messages. This message is the first Richie leaves, introducing himself to the recipient of the messages as a co-worker. He notes that it is apparently BSI policy that workers should get to know each other to aid with their teamwork and efficiency. Richie says that he is a night shift worker, and notes that both he and the message's recipient are summer job workers, though the one receiving the message has apparently already been a part of BSI for a while prior to this message. Richie relays a number of things, saying that the arcade machines will be on their way by Tuesday, and then the installations will be done by the people delivering them, to which he jokingly tells his co-worker that they owe him for that favour. He also says that their supervisor wants the documentation of the animatronic state by tomorrow, and that he thinks they'll meet on Thursday face to face when they get a tour of the installations. Thanks to some previous updates made to the FindJackWalten.com site, we know that originally the plan was for Bond's Burgers to open on the very first day of June. Therefore, this message was made just over a week before the original opening of the restaurant, and at the moment it seems that this plan is on track, the bringing in of the arcade cabinets being one of the final steps on the road towards being done. The tour around the installations was obviously meant to be a staff training or introduction day to familiarise themselves with the building before they actually opened. This second message from Richie is a bit more subdued than the prior message, but still positive. But noticeably, while the first message had the sounds of a busy arcade or other public gathering place, this message's background sounds are drippy and echoey, almost as if Richie is currently inside of a cave. Richie says that he's calling to update the recipient of the messages about the past few days. He notes that he got paid for the extra hours, and asks if they got the memo about the lockdown the place is going through. He says that apparently it was for an infestation of insects, and even later says not to come to work on Monday because people are doing a final sweep for signs of the bugs. He also passes down a message about the animatronics. It is no longer permitted for anyone but those who are authorised personnel to check and clean the animatronics, and they're not to go near them until further notice. This message is from nearly a month after the last one, and also a week after Jack Walten was known to last be seen. Again, one of the past updates to the website told us that Bond's Burgers had originally been planned to be opened on June 1st, but had been delayed with Felix showing up to the waiting crowd at 6 PM on the day to apologise for the last minute change. This message tells us that the public story was that there was an infestation of insects in the building, but given that the next known victim we know of, Susan, isn't killed until June 30th, this suggests that something came up around the end of May or the first day of June, which caused a very last minute change of plan. Something which, given the restriction on handling the robots, might have to do with them. However, given what had happened at the start of May, it's also possible that the delay might have had something to do with the tension between the Waltens and Felix, providing another possible motive for Jack's disappearance later. This third message was recorded the night before Bon's Burgers finally opened, and the message reflects this. Richie starts by quoting a saying, "Another day, another dollar," then awkwardly says he doesn't really know why he did that. He knows that it is the big day tomorrow, and asks if the recipient is excited before saying that the boss gave him instructions to pass on. He tells them that he's already put down the chairs for the tables, so that is one thing that doesn't need doing anymore. He also asks for them to keep an eye on what he calls the poker maze, to make sure no kids get lost in it, and as not to get lost in there either. He then asks how old the message's receiver is, saying that they're still a teen, right? Then, after giving a quick rundown on what needs doing, he says that the curtains on the main stage need to remain closed as Bon will be undergoing another week of maintenance, and as a result Shah is being moved to the secondary stage next to Buzu for now. He does however say that the sister company gave them a Bon costume, so he suggests putting it on and performing for the children as he doubts they'll be able to tell the difference, saying not to mind the smell of it. He also notes that someone might have been smoking pot in the men's bathroom, and asks that they open the windows and air it out so Felix doesn't notice. This call tells us that Bon's Burgers had a number of stages for their robots, and that from the sound of it, Bon and Shah usually share the main stage together. However, Bon is undergoing another full week of maintenance, which suggests that something was still wrong with the robot despite the opening day being delayed for almost 4 weeks, providing yet another reason that it might have been delayed. However, we also know from Bunny Farm that on June the 30th, a few days after opening, that Susan had taken Bon backstage to work on his arm, which had been noted to be stiff, so we know some of the issues that the robot had that required these extra days of tinkering at least. We also find out about the existence of something called the Poker Maze, which could have something to do with the /poker page that FindJackWalten.com has, maybe even with what we see when its current image gets brightened up. Could this mean that the maze was the place where someone met their end? Maybe Charles, who I theorised before, was trying to hide from something or someone before he died. Lastly, we find out about the existence of a Bon costume that it seems CyberFunTech might have provided to BSI, as we don't know of any other sister companies that were working with BSI on Bon's Burgers. In this message, Richie updates his co-worker of some new developments at work, saying that he has both good and bad news for them. He starts with the good news, saying that Boss is happy with the work done in the first week. Richie says that his colleague did well wearing the Bon costume, and says that he's recorded the performance in case they want to view it later. He then follows up by saying that Bon will be back on the stage by tomorrow, Felix having apparently set the robot back up by himself. He then follows up with some not so good news. He talks about how they have an associate within the company who did art for the restaurant who has been coming in recently, asking about her husband and causing a scene. Richie says that he feels something is wrong with her, and says that his colleague seems to know her and has been talking to her when she does show up. Richie says that he appreciates that she's being helped, but that the woman has been let go from the company yesterday, and now company policy is that if a former employee shows up and makes a scene, that they'll be permanently banned from the premises, so he asks his co-worker to keep her quiet if she does show up again. Then, after mentioning that no one did get lost in the maze, he moves on to the bad news. The backstage has now been locked for the week, and thus the robots are going to need to be stored somewhere different for a while, currently the men's bathroom. He says that he asked for details, but no one would elaborate on why. He also informs that Banny will not be performing for a few days, so the curtains on her stage should stay closed. This message is from the first day of July, which puts it as being recorded the morning after Susan was attacked by Bon in the backstage area after hours. Knowing this puts the bad news we hear into context. Someone had obviously discovered the mess the attack probably left behind, and had shut the area off to avoid people discovering it, also taking Banny out of commission for a few days for them to potentially clean her up too. We also hear about a former employee who did art for the restaurant coming in asking about her husband, and from these clues we can guess this is Rosemary, a fact that is confirmed during the Walten Files 4, as she is noted as the person who did the art for the company during that video. It seems she was causing people to start wondering about Jack, who had been missing for over a month at this point, and Felix was trying to make sure she was suppressed in doing so, with having her let go the previous day, which would make June 30th not only Susan's death day, but also Rosemary's firing day, and making it company policy that any former employee causing drama would be permanently banned from the building. Finally, we learn that Bon is now working again, despite having been previously said to be out of order for a week. Could Bon's issues have something to do with needing to make people beautiful? After all, his arm did get stiff once again in 1982, having sat in the K9 bunker with no one around for years. This message starts off with Richie attempting Spanish, then says good things are happening. He notes that the backstage is still locked and that the robots are now being stored in the generator room, but then says that the company has a new animatronic. He struggles for a few seconds to remember its name before remembering Billy the Clown. He apparently arrived the prior day and is top of the line technology-wise, Richie saying that he was playing with their radio thing all day. He notes that Bon is still working fine, but that his hand covers seem to be detaching very easily at the moment, so he asks that the co-worker be careful handling the robot's hands. He then says they have a birthday party coming up on the 14th, saying that it's actually for the daughter of one of their associates, although he can't actually remember the name of the girl. He says they need to make it extra good, and notes that he might show up in the Bond costume to help out with that, saying that if they both show up they can go smoking in the arcade area before signing off the call. This message tells us a few new things. Firstly, that Billy was indeed a later addition to the Bond's Burgers roster, which is why he never appeared in the first ever clip in the first video that was advertising the opening of the restaurant. There is also a birthday party coming up in which they want to use a new Billy robot for, a party on July the 14th. We already know that this is the day Charles will go missing, and as Boozy's level in Bunny Farm was for a girl called Lily, we can assume this is the daughter, and we later hear in the Walten Files 4 that Charles might actually be her father, and is therefore probably the associate mentioned in this message. The final message is much different to all the others, as this is Richie calling his colleague on the morning of July 20th, the day we know that Bond's Burgers shut down. Unlike every other message, Richie's tone is more frantic, more emotional and worried. He tells his colleague that he was clocked in last night and that some staff were still in the building. He then got a call at 4 AM from Norman, the CEO of Cyberfun, informing him that cops had broken into Bond's Burgers because they had received reports of screaming coming from inside, which sent the neighbourhood into a panic. As the doors were locked and they could see no one inside, they left. However, Norman was furious at the scene this had caused and was now ordering Bond's Burgers to close down, as the crowd gathered outside the building were claiming that someone must have gotten killed with all the screaming. BSI now had 3 days to close everything down. However, off the record, Richie informed his co-worker of a plan Felix had which he hadn't shared with Cyberfun Tech. He planned to take everything from the building, pack them into a truck, and then take them to a storage place somewhere, although Richie doesn't know where. He knows that it is big fucking money, probably referring to the pay, and then tells them not to tell anyone. He asks if they're in, and then says he'll see them tomorrow at 6, outside Bond's. From this we hear details about the reaction the screams from inside the building drew on the night of July 19th, and that while the cops didn't find anything, the local area was now aware of things going on inside the restaurant. The screams, of course, were those of Rosemary, looking for Jack and attacked by Bond before being hidden inside Shaw. This also means that whoever the Shadow Man is, probably Felix, but maybe this Shadow Man was a different staff member, was someone who was clocked in on the evening of the 19th of July. The public's reaction caused Norman and Cyberfun to lose their patience with BSI, and we now know that it was Cyberfun Tech, not BSI, who closed Bond's Burgers on July 20th, and that it was a sudden thing, not planned at all. We also learn that the removal of the robots to the K9 bunker was Felix's idea, independent of Cyberfun, and that he wanted it done off the books, and was willing to pay a large amount to the staff willing to help him do it. The 3 days to wrap everything up, and the fact that Felix's plan to move the robots started on the 21st though, seems to counter what I previously thought about the robots not being moved to K9 until the start of 1975. although this doesn't mean that Felix and BSI didn't manage to buy more time to move things from Cyberfun after what went down on the morning of July 20th. So, this is what I can glean from this particular page of the website, putting together information it gives with other pieces from both other pages and also the videos themselves. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be covering any of the other web pages in too much depth for now, as it was really this page that contained a good amount of information for me to discuss and theorise a little about. It gave some context to events we already knew about, told us about some elements we didn't previously, and was overall just a nice look into what the atmosphere might have been like at Bond's Burgers as Felix or whoever else tried to juggle keeping Jack's disappearance quiet with running the restaurant and certain employees going missing in some particularly violent ways. I've even been able to make some small guesses about Bond's stiff arm and where Charles might have met his end. We also know that whoever these messages were for, the person was young, possibly a teen, a summer job worker, but had been with BSI prior to May 23rd, 1974. Maybe even before 1974 entirely. But, as always, this is speculation and educated guessing given the pieces we have available to us. I could be wrong, or I could be aiming in the right direction, we'll just have to see. I hope you've enjoyed this quick little video, and that, as always, I've given you some things to think about. And a quick thank you to the Walten archives for documenting the changes to the website. Having the information I missed out on there helped a ton.